Tonight on Nation to Nation, two North Dakota politicians say final approval to build the Dakota Access Pipeline is imminent. What's the mood as the water protectors pack up their camp? APTN's Dennis Ward gives us the latest from Standing Rock. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau said Indigenous youth want a place to store their canoes and their paddles. We'll speak to Ottawa law student Tolley about his comments.
That's what the youth are telling us, and that's what we're going to do.
And the winter break is finally over. That means our political panel is back. This is Nation to Nation, and I'm Todd Lamirande. The youth suicide crisis hit the floor of the House of Commons this week. The issue was recently forced into the headlines again when two 12-year-old girls took their own lives in a Northern Ontario First Nation. Critics attacked a Health Canada decision that they could not immediately fund a prevention plan. Then, an anonymous donor came forward and pledged $380,000 for a mental health program.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister stated that he knew better than the Chiefs, and the top priority for Indigenous youth was a place to store their canoes and paddles. That's unbelievable. We have a suicide crisis. We had two 12-year-olds from Saskatchewan who took their lives. Our committee has traveled across the country with panels listening to the youth. They've talked about safety, they've talked about security, they've talked about education and hope. Canoe storage came up zero. Will the Prime Minister retract these condescending and out-of-touch comments?
Here to talk about it is Parliamentary Secretary for the Department of Indigenous Affairs, Yvonne Jones, Cathy McLeod, Conservative Indigenous Affairs critic, and Georgina Jolibois, Assistant Critic of Indigenous Affairs for the NDP. Now, I know the wheels of the bureaucracy can move slowly, Ms. Jones, and Health Canada has since committed to providing $380,000 annually. What is your department going to do?
Well, first of all, our hearts go out to all families across Canada who deal with suicide, those on First Nations and in Indigenous communities as well as others. We know that this is a serious issue that is inflicting many of our communities, and therefore we have been working, primarily our department, with Indigenous groups and Indigenous governments across Canada. In June, we launched the suicide strategy with the Inuit community in the north to look at programs and services for their communities. We've also been working with First Nations. We've increased the teams, the number of suicide teams that can provide the intervention across Indigenous communities from, I think it was 15 to 43 now. We've also invested substantial amounts of money into suicide initiatives and programs. We're going to continue to do that. And we want to continue our working relationship with communities to help identify services and programs that will help communities to heal, help communities to towards prevention of suicide. And for me as a member of Parliament, it's an issue that I struggle with in my own riding. 2 days ago I had another suicide in my own riding. In one community, this is the 6th since October. So I know full well the impact, the implications it has on community. I also know the need for more programs and services, and we're continuing to work towards that goal as quickly and as effectively as we possibly can.
Ms. McLeod, you brought the issue up in question period a few days ago. Conservative governments weren't known to be quick on these issues either, so what do you expect the current government to do?
You know, I think the committee, the Indigenous Affairs Committee of Parliament, it's the first thing that we tackled as an all-party commitment to really looking at what was happening, and certainly the very devastating testimony that we've been hearing is a huge concern, and I really am hoping that we're going to get towards the point where we're going to have some really solid recommendations for government from the work we've been doing. I'm a little disappointed this week. I had hoped to be be right back in it, but the Liberals determined that we were going to change our chair, and they needed time to bring this new chair up to speed in terms of what we've been doing. So it's another week delay, but again, hopefully, and I think we've all headed into this thing, we're hoping that we're going to have some really solid recommendations for government, and hopefully the government will look at them seriously and move forward.
Ms. Jolibois, you come from a riding course that has many remote northern communities. How many suicides can prevention programs actually prevent? What needs to be done?
There is a crisis among our First Nations and Indigenous communities, but I want to clarify one thing. Municipalities get often left out, and huge of our northern communities, municipalities have house off-reserve First Nations and non-status municipalities, and that's a portion where the Liberal government is missing out quite a bit. Even on First Nation reserves, recently in several of my reserves, there was a suicide prevention workshop held by youth in Shoal Lake, Red Earth. And then last night I had a conversation with a chief from one of my riding, and they're facing a crisis, for heaven's sakes. And so what's happening is that the government is talking very nice. The Prime Minister said that the best thing for him is, a very important thing for him is the nation-to-nation relationship of First Nations and Indigenous people. However, it is very moving slowly. Myself, coming from the area, I used to fully support a long-term plan. I have some ideas and I have some recommendations that I can provide forward. However, the immediacy, the urgency today, and the money is not flowing. When I listened to the chief who spoke last night, it broke my heart. In 6 weeks, there were 30 attempts and one that was successful.
Yeah, the time was inconvenient for money?
That's right. It was inconvenient, and then the way the system is set up, provincial shared responsibilities, bureaucracy, the money is not flowing, and federal government, what they will do is cut themselves of that. Well, it's the responsibility of the province, so therefore we're giving them the portion, and that's it. But the immediacy and the urgency is occurring now, and the youth are really wanting help, and it's not coming right away.
Speaking of money, the next issue is the recent one-year anniversary of the Human Rights Tribunal ruling on child welfare funding. The tribunal ruled that the Canadian government is discriminating against First Nations children by underfunding services, and the federal government has promised to close the gap.
Mr. Speaker, we are committed to completely reviewing all First Nations child and family services. We have invested $635 million over 5 years, and we are determined to work with First Nations, the provinces, and agencies to see real reform for the well-being of all children.
So, Ms. Jolibois, I'll start with you. Your colleague Romeo Saganash brought the issue up in the House just a few days ago. Minister Carolyn Bennett responded that they're committed to $635 million over 5 years to close the gap. What's wrong with that?
Well, the thing is, they do say nice things, but when it comes to the actuality of helping at the local level with the chiefs and councils and the municipal mayors and councils and other Indigenous groups, the Métis groups and the First Nations, what happens is that the bureaucracy is taking forever. And again, the urgency and the immediacy of what we're facing in our communities across Canada, as we face in Northern Ontario, as we face all over Canada. This is a crisis, and yet the federal government is not acting on it as quickly as possible. We are the largest youth population in Canada. We have a huge problem. And again, we are still committed to providing recommendations for long-term care, long-term support. But what's happening now is indeed a very difficult time for many of our communities.
Now, Ms. Jones, you've heard all this, and I think the message we're hearing is government is responding too slow. I mean, what can you do to speed things up?
Well, first of all, I want to clarify a couple of things on the suicide piece. Our government this year started the 24-hour 1-800 suicide line. we've received more than 650 calls through that line. So it is helping make a difference. We've invested more than $69 million towards the new suicide strategy and implementation plan in communities to work with those communities that are reaching out and need it. But in addition to that, we've also invested in housing and community centers and schools and youth programs, all of these things that are helping build and heal within the community. So I don't think those things can be ignored as not being action. They're concrete actions which are being taken by our government. In terms of the tribunal, it's the one-year anniversary, absolutely. We've committed to invest in total over $1 billion in the next 3 to 5 years. In implementing Jordan's principle, in broadening the definition of Jordan's principle. In addition to that, we've already spent this year more than $70 million in reaching out to provinces and territories with regard to the child welfare system. We've already started the process of overhauling the entire child welfare system on reserve. We know that that is needed and needs to be done. Our number one priority is protecting children in care. We want to move from a system of where we're removing children from communities to helping make children and families well and ensuring that children have the care and the supports that they need. Even with Jordan's principle, this year we've been able to provide services to an additional 1,500 children on reserve, and we're continuing with that process. We've had people from the Department of Health and INAC into communities, meeting with families directly, identifying children in communities directly as to who needs care, where more care can be provided. So it's the 1 year of a process that has been long overdue in this country. It is a process that is critical to the needs, health, and well-being of First Nations children. And we're going to continue doing what we're doing, and that is investing and in reaching out to communities, working with First Nations governments, and we're going to get this right. We are more than happy to invest wherever we can, but I think most importantly is getting it right, and the will is there to get it right and to help First Nations children. Okay,
Ms. McLeod, I can see you shaking your head. I'm going to give you the last word on this.
I think it's very simple. The Prime Minister has said two things. Number one, there was no relationship more important than his relationship with Indigenous people. The other thing he said is he talked about the importance of Parliament and the respect for Parliament and Parliament being supreme. There was a motion in Parliament that was very specific, it was very directive, and to be frank, they've not followed through. So to me, it's
that I and myself, Charlie Angus, worked on in introducing in the House, and we got it passed unanimously.
So I think, you take those two pieces and you say, I think you give the government an F in terms of how they've moved forward with the
Ms. McLeod
tribunal.
was part of a government for 10 years in this country that ignored children on reserve, did not make changes to the child welfare system, did not invest money, and in fact they used their money to fight the tribunal and to fight against Jordan's principle. So I'm going to tell you, after 10 years of witnessing that, I don't think there's any room for criticism.
We still have youth who are falling through the cracks and are not getting the support and services they deserve right now. Thank you.
It's certainly an important topic. I could see we could talk more about it, but we're all out of time, unfortunately. That's all the time we have. I want to thank you all for being here. Maybe we'll revisit this topic in an upcoming panel. Coming up after the break, we'll talk to Dennis Ward about the latest in Standing Rock, North Dakota.
Just pure insanity. I mean, it's just a prime example of how out of whack the American government has gotten. And they're gonna build a pipeline here and decimate 18 million American citizens as water, in the interest of corporate gain.
Welcome back. The camp full of water protectors in Standing Rock may be closing down. But construction of the Dakota Access Pipeline may start very soon. All this while dozens more were arrested yesterday. APTN National News anchor Dennis Ward has been covering it from the ground. Dennis, as you prepare to head home, how is the mood around Standing Rock?
You know, I would say the mood is probably a lot of people are feeling a little defeated this week. There was the camp cleanup, a deadline that was supposed to for people to leave on January 30th. Not many people did leave, but there was a cleanup that started. Heavy equipment came in, and that had some people worried that the camp was going to be cleared. And then you had North Dakota politicians saying the easement was about to be granted for the pipeline to go under the river, and that easement being granted was imminent. And then you had another standoff yesterday and 75 arrests. So it hasn't been a good week for those fighting against the Dakota Access Pipeline.
What did the dozens of arrests do to everyone's spirits?
Yeah, like I said, I think it's been a pretty rough week all around for people. Some of the people arrested yesterday, 75, it brings to the total almost 700 people have been arrested here since August.
One of the reasons the camp was dismantled was because it could be flooded come spring. Are people planning to come back?
Yeah, so the main camp hasn't quite been dismantled yet. They're clearing it away from the places that are closest to the Cannonball River because that is a floodplain, though the camp is still up there. Cheyenne River Sioux Tribe, which is a neighboring tribe here, is also set up a camp that should be set up any day. They're just going through all the lease and legal things up on the hill where people will be able to move to there. And I think a lot of people will still stay at the camp.
Did anyone tell you what they'll do if the pipeline is approved in the very near future?
Not really, because I think people still believe and hold in their hearts that they can defeat this pipeline. That's what people tell you anyways, although the cards are looking stacked against them at the moment. But when you ask people, do you think this pipeline's going to go through, people that are fighting against it say no, that it's not and that they're going to win. And I guess we'll see, as it's hard to tell whether it's going to be that easement's given the approval or not in the coming days. Some believe it might be, others think it'll be into next month, but the company, Energy Transfer Partners, building this pipeline has the equipment they need to drill underneath the Missouri River on site already.
What can the tribe do to halt construction?
Yeah, so the Standing Rock Tribal Council is still trying to meet with Donald Trump. They say that there should be a meeting with him over this all. They're also in court trying to fight this. So they are hoping, and they've been doing this the whole time, trying to fight against this pipeline going near their water supply through legal and political ways. And we'll see where those are at. Next week there will be another court date for the tribe, and we'll see what happens then.
One more break, but stick around as we get the thoughts of a young Indigenous woman on the Prime Minister's Canoes and Paddles comment. And welcome back. Last week, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau toured the prairies in a series of town halls. In Saskatoon and Winnipeg, he was asked about what Indigenous youth want. He said that instead of TVs and couches, they want a place to store their paddles and canoes.
Often I hear from Indigenous leaders who say, yes, we need a youth center. We need a youth center in our community. And I said, what do you want in that youth center? Well, the young people need sort of couches and TVs and ways to chill and relax. And that, when leadership of a community tells me that's what young people need, I know they haven't done a very good job of listening to their young people. That you know, couches and TVs is somehow what young people want. No, young people want a place to store their canoes and their paddles. They want culturally appropriate learning, experience of getting back onto the land.
Conservative Indigenous Affairs critic Cathy McLeod brought it up in question period 2 straight days.
Mr. Speaker, in Winnipeg, the Prime Minister doubled down and repeated the same comments that he made in Saskatoon. Rather than funding community-led initiatives for Aboriginal youth, he basically said, Ottawa knows best, I know best. Now, Mr. Speaker, what was the solution? Aboriginal youth really only want to need a place to store their canoes and paddles. I will again ask the Prime Minister to retract these condescending and out-of-touch comments.
We have in studio Caitlin Tolley. Welcome to the studio, Caitlin. She's been in and around Parliament Hill for the past couple of years. Caitlin, you saw how Trudeau was taken to task for these comments on social media about how out of touch he seems to be. How fair was that?
I think that Indigenous youth should be making their voices heard to the Prime Minister because we are the ones who are the experts on our own issues.
So did you think he maybe was out of his depth a little, or how did you take what he said?
I took what he said in terms of more of an opportunity to educate the Prime Minister on our issues. To me, it was clear that, yes, the Prime Minister had taken the opportunity to conduct these town halls, but to me there's also a concern about the level of education that the Prime Minister also needs, particularly from Indigenous youth.
Do you think that what exactly he said is a bit maybe showed his ignorance about these issues?
I would say not to paint all Indigenous youth with the same brush. The Indigenous youth issues that I was facing as a young woman growing up in my community may be different than those Indigenous youth who grew up on other communities. So I would recommend that the Prime Minister take the opportunity to meet with Indigenous youth and hear their voices and not to speak for them.
I get the feeling from you is you favor a more diplomatic approach. So what would be the best way to educate him?
The best way to educate him would, I believe, to be to take the opportunity to sit down with those young people who had those strong concerns and to take the opportunity to listen to them and hear what they have to say. I believe that their points were very valid. I think that the Liberal government does need to hear directly from Indigenous youth and being held accountable for their actions.
Now, some of those youth in social media or during the town hall are holding up signs. Some of them are Water for Life, referring to the Dakota Access Pipeline. Mm-hmm. Others talking about when are you going to do something about UNDRIP.
Yeah.
And you know, you could see they're getting under his skin, and he would sit down and he was waiting for them to, I don't know, quiet down. Do you think they were being fair to him? You know, when they were shouting him down and disrupting him during the town halls.
Speaking from experience, someone shouting at me doesn't. The message tends to sometimes get lost in terms of the level of verbal arguments that are going on. However, I think that it did send a strong message to the Prime Minister that Indigenous youth are watching the decisions that the Liberal government is making, and that we will not be silenced on issues.
Okay, well, it'll be interesting to see what happens as we go forward, if he does any more town halls. Thank you for coming in, Caitlin, and doing this for us.
Thank you very much.
Well, that's all the time we have for Nation to Nation tonight. I'll be back in the chair next week. I'm Todd Lamirande. Have a great evening.